All right, so welcome to the live stream. This is something special because this is literally the first time that we have gone live for coach certification training, our virtual training. And so if you're not a part of that training, you're still welcome to be around and hang out and talk to me about this area, this subject. But the reason why I am doing these, and we're going to be doing these on a pretty regular basis within certification. Hey, Donzel, I didn't even realize it was you because doesn't have the label on your name. Cool. Anyway, so the reason why we're doing these on an almost daily basis during certification is because certification is a really crash course in advanced coaching. I mean, we cover, as I mentioned during orientation this week, we're in orientation week right now. I cover the 3 advanced coaching disciplines in 4 weeks that we teach over like an 18-month period in Master Coach University: accountability coaching, strategy coaching, assessment coaching. And so, although there's something special and something important and something helpful uh, about learning these things quickly and then integrating them together kind of in the same couple weeks, because we can learn that quickly and really start modifying the style of how we help people and how we talk to people and how we coach them, just literally within a couple weeks, which is part of the reason why I do this so quickly with you, so you can get on with it, get your certification, and get to your business and start working with clients. But what's left in a little bit of that speed or the velocity that we do this with is that you can miss the details, right? It's easy to miss the little things that can lead you to a phenomenal transformation with your client, or a real breakthrough, or your client actually taking action where they weren't before, or the key to working with somebody that you really were challenged to work with in the past. And those keys matter. They make a difference. So although you can get the big picture in a couple weeks, and you can really start having breakthroughs yourself with just using the technology in a couple weeks, you're not necessarily going to get it all. And so, and especially during the training sessions where we're having those 2-hour training sessions, and you're learning and you're seeing them happen, and then you're going to go practice them. So the reason why I'm doing these lives with you on an almost daily basis throughout these 4 weeks, and we're not even started yet, this is like T minus 4 days and counting before we start with training, is because I really want to fill in the cracks. I want to give you those details that it's easy to miss when we're moving so quickly and you're just working so much. The way I look at it, it's like Michael Jordan on the basketball court. When he's playing basketball, he can't see or think about everything at once. He'd go insane. All the different players, the way the ball is bouncing, like how he's shooting and how he jumps. It's like he can't think of all those details. If he thought about more than like 1 or 2 little details at the moment that he's actually trying to perform, he loses mind. He wouldn't be able to perform. That's what choking looks like, is being like overly detailed and overly concerned about the little things that you just can't focus on, or it takes your focus away. It makes you ineffective, right? So it's important that we don't get overwhelmed with the details and don't get overly worried about the details, but I still want to offer you some of those, especially for those that feel that they need extra information in order to really do this powerfully, and you really want to gather all of your abilities and all of your mind together during this 4 weeks where you're going to do the most powerful coaching you've probably done in your life. Like, this is a great place to like put some extra time and energy in to adding some detail for you, not because it's going to distract you the way I just described with that Michael Jordan metaphor, but because then once you've gone through that, you could put it away and forget about it. Like when Michael Jordan's hanging out with his coach and they're looking at the past games and they're looking at how he performed and how the scrimmages went, and whatever they call that in basketball, I don't know, I don't watch it, but when they're sitting there with their coach in the video room watching the past plays, they can get pretty detailed. It doesn't mess up Jordan's performance. It actually adds to his map of the territory, but then when he goes out onto the court, he forgets about that map. It's still there, right? It's like, I've got a map here. This is helping me understand what I'm going to talk to you about right now. Okay? But I'm not, and I got it written down. I've spent some time thinking about what we're going to talk about. But I'm not sitting here with it in front of my face so we can't connect, right? Like it's here, it's available, it's kind of in the background. It's not the main event. The main event is me connecting with you right now, and I forget about the rest of this stuff and all the details so I can just be with you. And that's what you're going to do as a coach. So and I think maybe in a way one explanation to this, how I learned to coach in a way, is I learned every detail I could. I learned every little thing. I read every book. We're going to talk about that in detail, but I spent hours and hours and hours, thousands of hours, learning, watching, practicing, etc. But then there was a point where I had to forget about all that and just coach. Because if I sit there right now and I try to remember every single distinction, every single idea, every single book I read, every single piece of knowledge, every single item of wisdom that you could have as a coach, it's like I would go insane. I couldn't be here with you. I couldn't coach you. I could be a great coach. I could teach coaches to coach. None of the coaches on my team that really can be effective with their clients let the pedantic information and overly detailed facets of the map of the coaching territory stop them from being with their client and just being in the moment and dancing in that moment. So, that's not in my notes, right? And the reason why it came through anyway in this moment is because I'm not chained to these notes. We could do anything in this conversation, and many times we will as well. So you're going to learn a lot, and you're going to try to create a more and more detailed map. And in these live streams, I'm going to help you even more create a detailed map to guide you on the journey. But then as you get into coaching sessions and as you're on that journey, there's going to be a time, maybe not even in this training, maybe even not while you're practicing all these practices of every single kind of theoretical wave of disciplines. But there's going to be a point where you just forget about it. And you're just going to be with your client and you're going to coach. And that's going to be the best coaching that you've done. Not because you didn't learn anything, not because you don't know what you're doing, but because you do, and that comes through you without you having to think consciously about it. You're just the vessel, so to speak, for that knowledge, for that wisdom, for those questions, for those techniques. And the techniques just come through you. You're not the one making the technique happen. And that's when it becomes effortless. So I know that's kind of a high bar for the moment. I don't expect that in the first sessions that you do. It's not even necessarily the best idea, but it is the ideal eventually. And that is like an oversimplification of how I learned to coach. But that's what we're going to cover today. This is coach certification training, T-minus 4 days, still an orientation week. You know what you're supposed to be doing if you went through the orientation webinar at this point, or if it's still coming up, it's soon to come. You're going to be watching those preliminary videos. You're going to be taking your assessments. You're going to be filling out those forms. And whatever else I told you to do, checking out the roster and making sure you're hooking up with partners and you're ready to get together with your master coaches as well. Set that aside. That's all logistics at this point. So I'm going to tell you a little overview of how I actually, as it says here, learned to coach. And I think in order to do this, I'm going to change the visual, because this will help keep me on track. And do I want red? I want red. Okay. So I started out as a student, just like you are now, possibly. And I worked to be, this is not really in focus. Let me see if I can get it to work a little better for us. Is that That is more in focus. It's not perfect. Okay. We'll try and make that work. All right. So I started as a student, as it says here, and I was just soaking up information, techniques, wisdom. I read a lot of books, as this picture signifies. I read a bunch of books on NLP. Get books by Bandler and Grinder. Use your brain for a change, or using your brain for, I can't remember what the exact title is. Get Magic 1 and 2. Get Patterns 1 and 2, especially Patterns 1, the Erickson, I think, no, Patterns 1 is Meta Model, and Patterns 2 is the Erickson. Read Transformations by Bandler. Read those books, read those NLP books. It's really going to give you a sense of the paths to take for conversational frameworks of discovering what's going on with a client. And it also will give you paths to take for altering what's happening in your client's mind as well. Those are really great manuals to check out. I read Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl. I read 2 or 3 books by Wayne Dyer, not the whole thing, but I read a couple of them. I was always soaking up some kind of book when it was available to me to do so. And really the way I found these books is I listened to my mentors closely and found out who their mentors were. My guru's guru, so to speak. I mean, I very early on in my development as a coach, even before I was really professionally coaching, I was going to a lot of Tony Robbins seminars. He was kind of the thing in that day. Maybe still is, I don't know. But I would get his programs, like audio programs, right? And I would listen to who he learned from. And he was learning from NLP people and a lot of other great coaches and mentors, Jim Rohn, etc. And so I would find books by these guys and just soak it up, right? So you can follow the lineage of coaching technology back to the predecessors, the people that were coaching, but they didn't call it that. They probably calling it something else. And so yeah, there's just tons of great information out there that you can get in books, and that there are audio programs that are still around to this day, like the old Personal Power 2 audio program. Great place to start. I mean, that's kind of a coach in a box, so to speak. But there's tons more. There's podcasts nowadays where you can get hundreds of hours of coaching for free, just downloading coaching information available on audio downloads and podcasts as well, podcast directories for that. I remember when I went to the library and I got an archive of videos, and then eventually found audio content. I can't remember. I think I downloaded it from the internet somewhere, on tons of different seminars and small trainings that Richard Bandler had provided. These are things you can rip off the internet very quick and easy nowadays with a few Google searches. And I mean, I must have watched 30 to 60 hours worth of just Bandler talking about different psychological syntactical frameworks that he used to discover and diagnose what's going on with an individual or human being. Change frameworks and how to kind of reprogram somebody very quickly, like really detailed stuff that goes way beyond some of the basics of NLP. And some of it went kind of over my head, and I didn't practice all of it, but I practiced a lot of it. And that's kind of what this signifies. I mean, yes, I read, and yes, I listened to a lot of people and took a lot of programs, went to a lot of seminars, but I processed all of that, and then I took action on it for myself. I walked the talk that I was learning. I was my first and most important client initially. And this was frankly before I even imagined that I was going to coach people. I was just using it for my own benefits, ultimately. Hey, Josie. So, wow, and you're in Hawaii? It's probably, you can probably still see the sun, I'm guessing. Whereas the rest of us on the mainland are in darkness. So anyway, and I started to get my own results. I was getting results from my own life. So I remember very early on in this developmental process, there was a relationship that had gone sour that was really important to me, and with the the understandings and the questions and the discoveries that I was going through at the time, I resurrected that relationship. And I mean, it wasn't something that I expected to happen. It just over time with the conversations I had with these individuals and the difference that it made for my own way of feeling and thinking, it turned relationships around that were just radically important to me. And I was amazed that these things could happen. I remember a couple years later, I was still reading and tearing through this information before I was really coaching anybody. I was a musician at the time. I was going to music school in New York, a place called Manhattan School of Music, kind of purely a place where people studied music, a conservatory basically. There was really no serious academics there for the most part. And my dream at the time was to, be paid as a musician on a regular basis and really be able to make that my lifestyle. And so I used these things I was learning and reading about to kind of propel myself, to motivate myself, to open my mind to what was possible in that area of my life. I mean, frankly, my default thinking was, none of this is going to work. People are going to say no. You're going to get rejected. This is not going to work out well. You should just kind of like stay home and just pray for the phone to ring. That's the way you'll get a paying gig as a musician. But because I understood that my mindset about this was going to hold me back, it was going to have me hesitant. It was going to have me, just not doing anything to get where I could have gone. I realized I had to think differently about it. I had to have different beliefs, different thoughts, different kind of internal dialogue, or so to speak. And I had to decide that I had to visualize and imagine the future that I really believed I needed, even if I didn't know it was certainly possible. And I had to follow through on feeling that before I was going to necessarily do anything about it. And I did that. And what I found is very quickly, I started taking massive action. I would take my tapes out and I would go and hustle from door to door for all the different restaurants and bars and whatever in New York City, and just, kind of like press people to give us a chance to come in and play for their crowds. And we got some small results. There wasn't anything huge, but one of the things I was learning at the time was that part of this is not just like trying to get something for yourself. Part of this is contribution, right? That as you give back and as you make a difference for others, they kind of want to join your team. They reciprocate. And also, it just makes you more confident and feel better about yourself too. So you have more to give for yourself because you've given so much to others, right? It's kind of part of the creed of a coach, I think. But I was just getting this sense at the time. I was a selfish kid. And so I thought, wow, maybe I actually could like reach out and touch someone, reach out and make a difference for somebody else, not like as a coach, but just like somebody who cares, right? And so at the time, my mentor was doing Thanksgiving contribution efforts. They called this the Basket Brigade at the time. And in New York, this was kind of a big thing. There was a whole community of individuals that would go to these seminars and check out this wisdom and motivate themselves, but they would also get together and help others. And so I got together with this group, and we would go around on Thanksgiving Day. I happened to be kind of left in New York at the time. Everybody else had vacated and gone back to their families. I'd stayed, because I can't remember why, but I probably couldn't afford the plane ticket, or it was probably just not the most efficient use of my time and energy at the time. So I stayed in New York with a couple friends, and we went and contributed to people, and we found people that were didn't have a place to stay, and we gave them these baskets of food so they could kind of have a Thanksgiving. And it had some kind of inspirational messages in them so that they could hopefully kind of move themselves to a better place in their life. So the end of this day, we spent the entire day like giving all this different, food and baskets and messages to all these people that really needed it, just right on the street at times. In some places we went to a specific, home. Like in some of the toughest places, some of the most challenged places in New York City, like the Bronx and East Harlem. And anyway, so the guy who's leading this brigade at the time said, you know, we're gonna end our contribution efforts with whatever we've got left. We're gonna bring it to the musicians union. How's that for irony, right? I'm a musician. I'm bringing I'm bringing food to the musicians union that we have left to contribute. And they said, you know, and they have kind of a buffet there at the musicians union. So, you know, we can eat, we could kind of have some food ourselves, you know, and kind of make it a day. So, you know, it's late afternoon, sun setting in New York City. And, you know, we're in the middle of, we weren't quite in Times Square, but we were like kind of in Hell's Kitchen or something close to Times Square, middle of New York City. And we find the musicians union. I'd never been there before, even though I was a musician, because I wasn't like in the union. I was a student, right? And so we show up, we drop our food, and you know, some of the guys in the group are getting food, and I'm not really hungry, so I'm just sitting there, and I hear a voice behind me saying, "What instrument do you play?" You know, this kind of like deep, sonorous voice, right? And I turn around, and there is this man that looks like he was out of Pulp Fiction, right? One of those caricature types, and wearing a cowboy hat, bald-headed man, but dressed in a full suit as well, right? And I said, "Well, I play saxophone," right? And he said, "Oh, really? Well, you know, I've got a gig tonight, a Thanksgiving gig, and I need somebody to play. I need a band to play. Can you do it?" And my mind is racing, right? I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I could get a gig in New York City." And I just very quickly, because I had a friend that played guitar, and I was like, "Okay, I think I could put something together." I said, "Sure, I guess so. Let me check with my band," right? And so I go over to my guitar player friend who had been helping with, you know, this contribution effort. He was at the union as well. I said, "Hey, we got a gig tonight. You want to do it?" And he said, "Yeah." And so I went back to this guy who just kind of like found me. I mean, I wasn't there as a musician, right? I was there to contribute. And I said, yeah, we could do it. What time? Where do we go? He's like, "Go here, you know, at the bottom floor of, you know, of the Sheridan, at you know, 7th and Broadway or something like that," right? I said, "Okay, I got it. I got the address. It's a place called Martini's. I'll be there," right? And so, you know, I went back uptown, and this is a time, and this is like 1999, I think. So there was no serious internet. Like, you had to dial into the internet at the time. There was no streaming video or anything like that. You couldn't go on the internet and get like a decent map, okay? Nothing like that. There was no MapQuest. There was no Google Maps. There's no Apple Maps at the time. No mobile devices to use anything of the sort. Very few people even had cell phones at the time, right? So it was a bit of a luxury. So I go back uptown, and I'm looking at the map, you know, and trying to figure out how to get where this guy told me to go. And I'm looking at like, okay, we have to take this bus, and then we have to take this, you know, this line on the L train, and the public transportation to get us there. And I was like, you know what, maybe it's too late to do that. Maybe we just grab a cab and just get there. You know, I mean, this is a big opportunity for us. Let's do it. So we got a cab, because, you know, we were about to run late, myself and my guitar player rhythm section, so to speak. And the cab has taken us wherever the gig is, right? And the cab says, "Okay, we're here. That's Martini's." And we look out of the window of this cab, and we look up, and we are in the middle of Times Square. We are right under a easily 50 to 70-story building. I mean, they're all high rises there, right? And at the bottom of what's basically the Sheridan, it's this giant hotel in the middle of Times Square. Looking across the street, you could see, you know, David Letterman, where Letterman was at the time, Ed Sullivan Theater, and we see in lights the name of the restaurant, Martini's. Huge restaurant, takes up the entire block, or at least that corner of the block. And we're like, "Oh my gosh, this is where we're playing tonight. We're playing in the middle of Times Square, across from Letterman, right? This big 5-star restaurant." And so we get out and are like this, like walking to the gig, and we see the guy that found us at the Musicians Union and set up and played, and they fed us this amazing food, and we got paid well. And I'm sitting there eating dinner on a set break with my guitar player rhythm section and saying, "So happy Thanksgiving." And he's like, it's amazing, Jeff. Like, we spent all the whole day trying to help other people, not even thinking about like getting a gig for ourselves and all our dreams. And here we are, we got what we were looking for. And I said, it's quite a message for us to, quite a lesson for us to learn, and it's so ironic, right? But that came out of all this hustling that came out of learning and learning and learning for no reason other than just selfishly trying to help myself initially, and then taking the risk of wanting to, help other people in the process. That one night, that Thanksgiving gig turned into a 3-night-a-week independent gig that I took over eventually. And I had, hundreds of musicians that I would hire to play for me, with me, on that gig, in this, 5-star restaurant. I don't know if Martini's is still there. I don't live in New York City anymore, right? But it was a message that really hit me at the time that, there's a lot of people that are going to tell me all sorts of things I can do to hustle and try to get stuff for myself. But, when you're giving of yourself and you're giving your greatest gift and you just care, eventually it does come back to you. And that was just kind of an instant gratification version of that. So those are some of the results I got for myself. And that was just me as a student trying to figure out what the story was for learning this to help myself. But eventually I got really passionate about it and I wanted to share it with others, kind of even before I thought about like becoming a coach. And so I became what I like to call a parrot. and I remember the day that I literally was called this one day. Like, I never thought of myself this way, but this was early on in my development as a coach in my coaching business. And I had a coach. I was spending thousands of dollars on them mentoring me because they made $1 million a year as a coach at the time. And I wanted to learn what they did and learned how to do what they did so that I could make that kind of money, right? And so he got to know me over a period of months, of course, as I was his client. And he said, Jeff, you're a good parrot. And I realized that, a lot of what I said and a lot of what I did and a lot of, what kind of came through me at the time was really me parroting what other people had taught me, what other people said. And at the time, that's kind of all I really was. I had some skills, there's no doubt, but I was more of a parrot than anything else. So I became this parrot. And what I did was I'd take the knowledge that I had learned from all these exploits as a student, and I would just regurgitate it onto my friends. I would just share it with everybody I could find. And to some extent, I started to problem solve with people. I would listen to their issue and listen to what they were dealing with, and I would think about like kind of my Chinese menu of items that I had learned over years of development work, years of being a student. And eventually I would just think of, what, they need that. And I would share that with them. But I was really a parrot, right? But guess what? Because I had been through so much learning and so much experience of using this for myself as well, kind of as a mentor, if you will, I was able to make a difference for people. Now that's not exactly coaching, right? But, it's under the umbrella of making a difference for people. And you could argue that a coach can do that to some extent. Yeah, nothing wrong with being a parrot. We've even got the icon there. I love it. Thanks for that, Dunzel. So anyway, that's where I started. I just parrot for people and pass things along as much as I possibly could. But there was a point, and this was before I was really pursuing this professionally, where I wasn't just parroting, but I was facilitating a conversation that had been facilitated for me earlier in my development. And I remember the day that my roommate came home and she was crying because her boyfriend had just broken up with her. And I was like, oh my gosh, how could I get her to stop crying? And And I realized, that there was a process that I had gone through myself that had really turned me around very quickly, like 10, 15 minutes. And so I started parroting the process to her. But as I was doing that, she started throwing, curveballs at me. She started saying things that I would never have said myself. She started offering other perspectives that I didn't have. And so I started shifting my approach based upon her perspective, based upon what she was coming up with. And so I went from parroting to really this moment where I was a facilitator of a process that I had not created. But I was no longer just regurgitating information. I was dancing in the moment with really who was my first client. Unless you count everybody else I was like pouring all this unwanted information on, right? So 10, 15 minutes into this process, she stops crying and she says, I think I'm making these changes and I know what I need and thanks a lot. And that was it. And I thought, hey, pat yourself on the back for that, Suey. That was really nice. But the next day, I'm sitting at music school, as we do as music students in New York City. She's a fellow music student. She's across the street. She's walking over to come to class. And she's got this big smile on her face. And she comes right up to me and she looks at me. She says, I feel great today. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what I facilitated the night before is still impacting her today. It wasn't just a one and done. It wasn't just a momentary relief. What I did was so powerful with her, and what she did as a result of what I facilitated was so powerful for her that she's different today. Because chances are, had she just been left the way she was, when she had come home crying, she'd probably not have a smile on her face at a minimum. And I started to think, wow, this is tremendously powerful stuff. I should be proud of what I'm able to do. And this is a power that I want to use even more to make a difference for people because I know what's possible now. And there was a little voice, kind of like the when you hear the voice of God in your head, like crying out to you, like something that you need, some wisdom. And it said to me, and didn't sound like my voice. That's why I kind of feel that way about that moment. It said, this is who you're going to become one day. This is part of your life. And at the time, I didn't even want to hear that because I'm like, no, I'm a musician. I'm gonna be a star. I'm gonna do all these other things that are like more performative in nature, not just help people. But at some point later on down that road, I started to seriously listen to it. So I had that kind of epiphany moment, if you will, and decided, hey, this is something I have the intention to do. I'm now motivated to become what's possible as a coach. So that was the beginning, though, just being a student and then being kind of a parrot. And then there was this kind of transition point where I was more than just a parrot. Now, how did I get good, though? That was just becoming a coach. Like probably what I was doing back then is what a lot of your average coaches might do today. They parrot things, they facilitate things, they kind of manage you with a checklist of wise things that you need to develop yourself with. Frankly, most coaches are not really facilitating a dance with their client of inner magical relationship, right? They're more often than not micromanaging training tasks that any seminar could offer a client. It's like, hey, here's your thing, here's your set of things you're going to do for yourself. Now let's just check off that list, right? I mean, some of the early coaching universities, and some of them still do this, they give you the checklist and they say, hey, this is what you're going to do with your clients. To me, that's not really the greatest expression of coaching. That to me is like just facilitating a checklist at best, right? It's kind of more like a personal trainer for other parts of your life other than your body. So there was a point where I got beyond that. And in a way, to some extent, it was just more of what I've already described. Like going up a level was just learning more, doing more, facilitating more, practicing more. So I kept learning, but I also added to that observation. I started to see what other coaches were doing, what the greats that I looked up to were doing. And because I understood a lot of the technology now, because I'd been trained in the theory of it, because I learned the theory, I could observe what they were doing and understand, hey, I know that technique. I know why they're saying that here. And I started to connect the dots. Now, a lot of it I still was totally over my head, but I was getting like a little ray of light in there as to what was actually going on. So yes, way more books, way more seminars, way more tapes and audio. I mean, tapes at the time, right? It was 1999, right? But I took tons of notes and I reviewed the notes again and again to try to jam it into my head. And as I observed some of the master coaches I looked up to at the time, I tried to identify what they were doing, at least based on what I had been learning at that point. So I tried to connect, if you will, what they were doing with what I had learned. I was connecting those dots. And it's like, that's not new knowledge per se, but it's connecting the theory with the practice, right? So I was learning and I was seeing and I was connecting those two dots so I could have conscious understanding and control over what, at least understanding what they were doing, so I could potentially not parrot that, but repeat and replicate those kind of experiences, those kind of results. So I'd practice and practice and practice. I'd learn, I'd see, I'd observe, I'd connect, and then I'd practice again and again and again. I would go practice and try to replicate what I saw those coaches do. I tried what I was learning. I didn't just learn it and then just forget about it and think, well, I can't do that because, I'm not good enough. Luckily, at the time, I understood enough about limiting beliefs to know, hey, if I just think that way, that's going to stop me. It's going to prevent me from getting where I really deserve to get. So at the end of the day, what we do in certification training is me trying to replicate what I did over a period of years and doing that in 4 weeks. As we talked about during orientation, if you haven't been in orientation yet, you'll check it out. First, you learn the theory. Then you see me do it. You see a master of this craft, actually using the theory successfully with a client. And then you're going to go do it. Learn, see, do. And that's exactly what we do in certification. You're going to learn it. You're going to watch the videos. We're going to review it. You're going to see me doing it. We're going to do those in the live training sessions. And then you're going to go practice that because that is in your homework. Now, finally, I'm going to give you some finer points. But really, again, you could leave now and that's really how I learned to coach. I was a student and a parrot, and then over time, I kept learning, I kept observing what others were doing effectively, and I did it and did it and did it, and I just kept repeating. I rinse and repeat on that process over and over and over again. But here's some finer points. Part of that process was me setting an intention that I cared enough to do this. I was cultivating like a magnet, my desire for doing this. Be hungry enough to practice and practice and learn and learn and learn, and never let myself get bored of the process and always be inventing the next possibility for how to do this better. And I was asking questions all the time. I was always curious about what could make this better. What could make this work? What's missing for me? What's going on with the client that I'm working with? I was always asking those questions. Because the more I was asking, the more answers I got, and the more it led me to new questions to ask either myself or my clients, or ask my mentors for that matter. And then I would try it and try it and try it. All those answers and all that motivation and all of that intention, I would try to make those work. I would try to fulfill on all of that. And I didn't always succeed. I probably failed more than I succeeded. But those trials helped me to get to more and more successes as well. And eventually I got to the point where I could control the process, not just attempt it and fall apart. The one thing I don't have written here, but I want to make sure is clear, that besides all of this, there was a point where I had to, I don't want to say rest, but where I think this comes full circle to what we talked about at the beginning of this conversation. I had to get out of the way. I could learn a million things. I could be hyper hungry, ask a bunch of questions and try to figure it out and try to do better and better and better as a job, as a coach. But there was a point where I had to forget about all that and just coach, where I had to get out of my own way, because all of this is great for cultivating skills, cultivating knowledge, cultivating a kind of a framework or a foundation. But at some point, that can get in your way. And I was getting in my own way at the time, or at times at least. And so when I finally just said, you know what, I'm just gonna help this person today, whatever it takes. Forget about the agenda, forget about the framework, forget about all that stuff I learned, trying to remember what I'm supposed to tell them. Just be with them, ask questions, discover, be curious, and get out of your own way. Part of getting out of my own way was also giving myself time to meditate on this stuff, to allow myself to fall into the hypnosis of letting my mind work the rest of it out without effort, to sleep on it at times, to let go and not expect that I had to have an answer right at this moment. Some of our trainees need to have the perfect answer in order to feel confident or certain enough to do anything. And when they discover that coaching is not about answers, or they discover that there's not one answer but five, and when they discover that not any of those five answers sometimes will work, and because there's all sorts of different variation with their clients, they lose their mind. They give up. They think that they can't because of that. It's just not true. The truth is, you can live in the question. You can live in the inquiry. You can live in the curiosity. You can live in the gap of trying. Or you could just live in the dimension of, I don't have to know all the answers. It's going to come through me. I'll give you one more way to think about this. When I was studying as a musician, I played saxophone, and one of the idols that all of the saxophonists at the time looked up to, because we were all like jazz musicians, right? And we were improvisers. We wanted to be able to just play without any music in front of us, without anybody telling us what to do. Just be able to, like in rock and roll, like the guitar solo, and they're just playing, and it's not necessarily a set thing. They're just in the moment and being there and creating just what comes through them and the power of that. We want to be able to do that. So there are all these methods and information and intentions and trial and error that we went through. But our idol at the time was this gentleman whose name was Charlie Parker. And Charlie Parker was also known in the world as Bird, because he was like a bird. He music just came through him. And he was known in his lifetime as the greatest improviser and the greatest kind of creative musician alive, possibly of all time. I don't know if you could argue that, but possibly, right? And so nobody could match him at the time. In fact, you watch Bird, the movie, which is done like 30 years ago now, documents his life, and it documents how once he was in his heyday, anyone around him looked like a joke compared to, sounded, we're talking about music here, sounded like a joke compared to him in the performance, right? And so Paul Desmond, anybody know Paul Desmond? He was the saxophone player on Take Five. This is a kind of famous tune that most even non-jazz people remember from Dave Brubeck, right? Take Five. It's basically in five, right? It's in the 5 meter tune, which most everything else is in four, like rock and roll is like boom, 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 boom. And here it's just, five instead. So famous tune. Paul Desmond's a sax player on this tune, and he interviews people for Downbeat Magazine, famous jazz magazine, because he's kind of known as the kind of a luminary in that world. And so he's interviewing Charlie Parker. He's interviewing Bird. Now, Desmond is no player compared to Bird. They play the same instrument, right? But of course, nobody else is either. And so Desmond's interviewing him, all the normal stuff, and then finally he says, Bird, there's a question I got to ask you, just for my own reason, but everybody else I know is going to want to know the answer to this question. You're known for great virtuosity on your horn, on your saxophone. And it's to the point of being so virtuosic, so amazing, so genius that no one else in the lifetime of this instrument, in fact, probably in the lifetime of, jazz improvisation itself, has never really matched. Like, nobody's matched you. You have no equal. And so how did you do that? How did you become who you are today, who can do things that nobody else can do, nobody else can touch? And Bird is like, he's kind of like not a big communicator. He's a musician. And he's like, you make it kind of hard for me to answer you. But here's one thing I could say. I spent years trying to master my craft and learning the language. And, there was a time during my development as a saxophonist, as an improviser, where I probably was just learning the horn and learning how to get around and all the different keys and all the different meters and all the different tunes and all the different chord progressions and all the different licks and improvisations that I was trying to learn, and copying as a parrot, because he loved Coleman Hawkins, he loved Sonny Rollins, he loved all the other greats that were before him, right? And he said I was trying to learn all that, and I would spend, maybe like 14 hours a day doing that when I was really learning. And he said, that is true. I did spend a lot of time there. But yeah, I suppose, I probably did that for a period of about 4 or 5 years. So he learned as much as he could and tried as much as he could and was a student as much as he could of his craft, 14 hours a day for 4 or 5 years. And nobody could touch him. So I wonder, was he talented? Probably. I know what's famous in his story is that he really wasn't that good initially. And, people kind of looked down on him as a musician. So he studied and studied and studied and studied and studied. But then he said this. He said, but Paul, you know what? Even though I know my horn back and forth, even though I know the language back and forth, even though I know every single thing to do in my art back and forth, now I don't even think about that stuff. I just forgot. I've forgotten it all. Now I just play. Now I just let it go. Let it go through me. I don't even try. I just effortlessly let myself be the vessel of the music and the message and the improvisation that comes through me, and it just does. It doesn't always fit perfect, but, of course, you can see the result. So, yes, learn everything you can learn. Master your craft. Try and try and try and get better and build that muscle. But after that, just forget about it and just play. And that's exactly what I said at the beginning of this conversation. If you stuck with me for this long, it's like, yeah, I worked a lot at those things, but there was a point where I had to get out of my own way and just do it. And just practice it and just be with the client and let myself be in the state of mind where I was just there with him. And I think, thinking back to the old music days, that is what my predecessors did in that area, in that genre. And in a way, what I think I do now is similar in that you've got to improvise when you're dancing with your client. You can't just parrot information, and you can't just facilitate some process. There's going to be information, there's going to be processes, but you've got to be an improviser too. You got to be able to live in that moment and dance in the moment and give people's, just riff off of things that people are talking about. There is a way to riff verbally, not just musically, right? Not just in your singing or your scatting, right? And that kind of creativity, that inventiveness, that intuitiveness is something that gets lost if all you do is the pedantic checklist that I teach you, okay? Because that's where we're going to start. And you still want to know that stuff, just like Bird did, just like I did. But then you could just start anywhere, with any conversation, with any client, with any situation, with anything that you might say back to them. And it doesn't matter where you start, because there's nothing wrong with any of it in your intuition, in your creativity, and in your artistry, as long as you're in that moment, you'll find your way and you don't even have to think about it. You can be silent within yourself, so to speak. You can be in a meditative space, in an effortless space where you're not strong arming your client, and let it happen, but still cause transformation and still, like I said, effortlessly master the conversation in that moment. But no, you're not going to do that if you don't know all the stuff and the techniques and everything. But if all you're doing is techniquing your client, you're never going to get that good. You're definitely never going to master it because that's just not mastery. There's millions of musicians that learned every scale, that learned every song, that learned every riff. I'm not saying they're not like good, but they're not the masters. They're not Bird. They're not the masters that are alive today. Those masters forgot about that stuff at some point. It doesn't mean they can't remember it. It doesn't mean they can't match those other individuals in the craft. It's just they went beyond that. They let go, they got out of their own way, and they were just there, being in the moment, in the conversation, within that improvisation. And that's what you're going to do. You're going to go into the state of mind where you let go of all these techniques and you're just there with your client. And learning that was probably the most important lesson because all the other stuff was not easy to learn, but anybody can grind through the logistics of that stuff. Luckily, I learned that as a musician because there were Inner Game of Music and there was the Effortless Mastery book and program that I had gone through that was all for music at the time, all for musicians trying to be great at what they did. And I practiced that, but I still apply that to this day in my mindset as a coach. And when I'm really in that moment of genius and when I'm really in that place where greatness comes through me, it's when I have no effort involved in it, and it's just a matter of letting it flow in the conversation and getting out of my way. Like Bird said, forgetting about my craft and just play. So you've got some work to do, no doubt. You've got some craft to learn, and we're going to have that. We're going to take care of that for you. And I'm going to be demonstrating using that at a level of mastery. And all you want to do is match what you see with what you've learned. Be creative, be intuitive, be curious, and then try and try and try again. But at some point, you're going to let go. And you're going to make things happen that take no force, but is very, very powerful itself. So that said, I'll see you in a day or two when we talk about some other elements and finer points before we start in certification training. And if you're not in training, if you want to keep track of these conversations, then best way to do that is go to the YouTube link, and it's going to be somewhere if you're not on YouTube, and just subscribe to the YouTube channel. And I'm going to be posting these out there on YouTube on a regular basis. So subscribe there. And look, I mean, you want more people to get access to some of what we're talking about and covering, then, like the video, comment on the videos, because that really helps us share what we're talking about here with kind of the greater good and the greater community that I would love to, and is really my mission to contribute to and reach as well. But that said, I will talk to you guys next time, and I'll see you next week in our first training session in coach certification training. Take care until then.